In the year 1932, Australia went to war. But it wasn't against another nation. It wasn't against an invading army. It was against birds. Yes, birds. Specifically, emus. Giant, flightless birds standing over 6 feet tall, running faster than a horse, and known to be incredibly tough. And when the dust settled, it was the emus, not the humans, who claimed victory. This is the bizarre, true story of the Great Emu War. To understand how this strange war began, we need to travel back to the years following the First World War. Tens of thousands of Australian soldiers returned home, eager to leave the battlefield behind and begin new lives as farmers. The government encouraged them, offering land in the wide, open spaces of Western Australia, a chance to grow wheat, to raise families, to build a future on the soil they had fought to defend. But dreams often clash with reality. The land was harsh. The soil was poor. The climate, unforgiving. And as the years passed, prices for wheat continued to collapse. By 1932, the Great Depression had tightened its grip, and farming families were struggling simply to survive. And then came a new challenge. A challenge no one had prepared for. Every year, emus, giant, flightless birds standing taller than most men, migrated across the countryside in search of food and water. Normally, they passed without too much harm. But in late 1932, things were different. That year, an estimated 20,000 emus marched straight into the newly settled farmlands of Western Australia. To them, the farmers' wheat fields were not livelihoods. They were an endless banquet. The birds trampled fences, flattened fields, and devoured what little the farmers had left. For families already pushed to the brink, it was devastating. After years of hardship, to watch their crops being eaten alive by flocks of birds felt almost unbearable. So, with desperation mounting, the farmers turned to the one authority they believed could save them. They asked the government for help. The Australian government responded in a way that almost defies belief today. Not with fences, not with farmers' tools, but with the military. In November of 1932, a small unit of soldiers was dispatched to the farmlands of Western Australia. These weren't ordinary men. Many of them were veterans of the First World War, men who had faced machine gun fire, trenches, and battlefields overseas. And now, they were being sent to fight birds. They were armed with 2 Lewis machine guns, the same kind of weapon once used against enemy troops in Europe, each gun capable of firing hundreds of rounds per minute. Along with them came nearly 10,000 bullets. The mission sounded straightforward. Find the emus, drive them into tight groups, and unleash overwhelming firepower to cut them down. To the farmers, this seemed like salvation. To the soldiers, it was supposed to be routine. How hard could it be to outmatch a bird? But what no one realized at the time was this. Nature had its own strategies, and the emus were not going down without a fight. The first battle began near the town of Campion. Soldiers spotted a group of emus and prepared their ambush. But the birds scattered in all directions before the guns could do much damage. The soldiers fired again and again, but the emus were fast, running up to 50 kilometers per hour. Some were hit, yet still kept running, seemingly immune to bullets. The wide-open farmlands gave the emus all the space they needed to escape. At one point, the soldiers mounted a gun on the back of a truck to chase the birds. But the ground was so bumpy that they couldn't aim properly. The emus outran the truck, leaving the soldiers bouncing helplessly behind. One military report even described the emus as if they were trained soldiers. They employ military tactics. A small squad of emus will form, while the main body makes a dash in another direction. They are like guerrilla fighters. By the end of the first week, thousands of bullets had been fired. And the number of confirmed emu casualties? Barely a dozen. News of the so-called Emu War spread like wildfire. First across Western Australia, then across the entire country, and soon, the world was laughing. The newspapers had a field day. Headlines mocked the government's failure. Cartoonists drew ridiculous images of emus chasing soldiers, or soldiers surrendering to giant birds. What was meant to be a show of military strength had turned into a comedy for the public. The farmers, meanwhile, were furious. Their crops were still being eaten, their livelihoods still at risk. And now the entire nation was treating their struggle as a joke. The politicians were embarrassed. They had promised a solution, but all they had delivered was a spectacle. And the soldiers themselves, were humiliated. Men who had fought in the Great War, now ridiculed for losing to a flock of birds. One soldier would later remark, half in jest, that the emus seemed to face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. It was a statement both comical and painfully true. What was supposed to be a simple operation had spiraled into a national embarrassment. The Great Emu War had become not a victory, not even a defeat, but a running joke in Australia's history books. By December of 1932, the so-called campaign had dragged on for weeks. And with each passing day, the results grew more embarrassing. The soldiers had tried ambushes. They had tried chasing the birds with trucks. They had fired thousands upon thousands of rounds. But the emus refused to surrender. In the end, the government could no longer justify the farce. The operation was officially called off. The soldiers packed up their guns and withdrew, leaving the farmlands not in triumph, but in quiet humiliation. The numbers told the story best. Nearly 10,000 bullets had been fired, and yet fewer than 1,000 emus had been killed. It was a military campaign with a kill ratio so poor that some joked it should never even be called a war at all. The conclusion was undeniable. The emus had won, and Australia, despite its soldiers and its machine guns, had been defeated by birds. With the soldiers gone and the emus victorious, the farmers were left once again to face their problem alone. But this time, the government tried a different approach. Instead of sending in machine guns, they introduced bounty hunting. Farmers were offered rewards for every emu they killed, and this method proved far more practical than military intervention. Later, vast fences were built across the landscape, structures designed not just to keep out emus, but also rabbits and other pests that threatened Australia's fragile farmland. These defenses worked. Where bullets had failed, simple barriers succeeded. But while the fences solved the immediate problem, the story of the Great Emu War refused to fade away. Even today, it is remembered as one of the strangest, most unlikely chapters in military history. A tale so bizarre, it almost sounds like fiction, and yet, every word of it is true. It stands as a reminder that no matter how powerful humans believe their technology to be, nature always has its own way of fighting back. In the end, the Great Emu War was more than just a battle against birds. It was a lesson that even with the might of modern weapons, human beings are not always the masters of the world around them. So the next time you see an emu, remember this. You're not just looking at a bird. You're looking at a veteran of one of the strangest battles in history. A bird that once stood against the Australian military and won. The Great Emu War is more than just a funny story. It's a reminder that history is filled with moments so bizarre, so unbelievable, that if they weren't true, you'd swear they were fiction. And that's exactly what we uncover here on Prime Speaks, where forgotten stories, strange events, and hidden truths come alive. If you enjoyed this tale, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because here, history speaks louder than fiction.